All right. Welcome back, comrades, to episode 7, Procast on China. I've got a special guest, Jason Unruhe, here with us today. Thanks for taking the time, Jason. I appreciate it, man.
No, that's good.
So, China, the topic of China. Um, as a as a Marxist myself, who really didn't at one point in time, didn't have any real understanding of what's going on in China, or the history. It just seemed really, I guess you could say, really intimidating, just because there's so much history, there's so much going on, and it's a big country itself, and its economy apparently is a bit difficult to understand. um, we're going to try and maybe hash out uh, what some of those differences are, and maybe answer the question: is it a socialist country, or is it a capitalist one? Which, considering on my point, I consider it to have a planned economy, and with the uh, country firmly in control of a communist party with over 80 million members. So, but let's maybe go. Jason, what do you have to say about that?
Well, I would say as a main argument, I would say that a lot of it is false attribution and circular reasoning. Like, for example, they say, well, here's the economic development that's happened, and I don't deny that's happened. That's certainly obvious that that's taken place.
Right,
But socialism isn't the only system that can do that.
right, right. Well,
So the point would have to prove that it was socialism that did it, not opposed to capitalism. I think that the problem is China. It doesn't. I think is having the main understanding of the difference between capitalism and socialism. Socialism ceases to function on the basis of competition, because competition in the market is what leads to economic inequality, etc. That's the main function by which capital accumulates. The elimination of competition. Like, for
well,
example, you can still have
sure.
state capitalism. You can still have, capitalist enterprises
Right, but the main
competing.
thing here, though, I mean, commodity or capital generation or anything like that, it's who's in control of the means of production? Are they privately held? Are they controlled by a state? Are they controlled by a communist party? And in this case, the means of production are firmly in control of the Communist Party of China.
And I would say that's false.
Okay, companies in China, including even foreign firms, are required by law to establish a party organization, something that is regarded by
So what?
many people to be symbolic more than anything, right?
Yeah,
Um,
symbolic. How does
right,
that affect how it actually
right.
runs?
One, okay, and so what happens is, and so one senior executive whose company was represented at the meeting told Reuters that some companies were under political pressure to revise the terms of their joint ventures with the state-owned partners to allow the party final say over business operations and investment decisions. Okay. And so, like, that's just giving you just like a small glimpse into like how pervasive the party is, into how business can actually be done in China. And I think that's something kind of important to understand, wouldn't you say?
I would say that it presupposes China to be a socialist state. Like, a heavy government regulation is not unique to socialism. The government just doing stuff doesn't constitute socialism. I
Well,
think
the
that it's
government
important
doing
to
stuff in the
understand the
name
main
of the
divide
people, though, is
between
what's important.
capitalism and socialism. Like, you can just have them come in and regulate, so what? That doesn't prove that China's socialist. It just says that there's heavy state intervention. I mean, you can find stuff like that in Western
But
Europe.
who benefits from this? Who benefits from the state intervention on this, though? I mean, these things are done in order to benefit the people themselves and the party
I would
themselves.
argue that the Chinese economy, while planned to a degree, is not planned according to serving human need, but towards economic development. And there is a very clear distinction between the two. There is more of a focus on the actual development of the economy as opposed to being need for people. Like, I have never understood, if it's a socialist country, why isn't there a universal healthcare program? That makes absolutely no sense to me. That's the very pinnacle, like the most basic thing that you would have to do in order to be
Yeah,
a
honestly,
socialist country.
I've never heard an instance of people going broke because they can't pay their medical bill in China, or being thrown out of the hospital
I
because
can I
insurance
can
ran
think
out.
I could think of a very common example. In China,
Yeah.
if you say, just say, take the example of a car accident and you injure somebody, you are on the hook for that person's medical expenses for the rest of your life. And it is often a case where if they cause an injury, I mean, you could see videos of this happening over and over again. People will deliberately try to kill that person so they don't have to pay it.
Okay. Um, yeah, I don't know how that really establishes whether or not a society is capitalist or socialist. I mean,
Why isn't the universal healthcare stepping in and taking care of the person?
I'm not, honestly, I'll be honest, I don't know the ins and outs 100% of the Chinese medical system, but yeah, I don't really understand how that would factor into the working class being in control of the means of production along with the Communist Party.
I
I
was
don't
just giving that
know.
as an example of that, like the economy being geared towards uh, need rather than for the sake of economic development.
So you mean like commodity production, right?
Not necessarily. For example, uh, there in Marxist economics, there's a breakdown into two categories: Department One commodities and Department Two commodities. Department Two being consumer goods, and Department One being the production of the means of production. I would argue that what China has done to a very large degree is focus on the Department One commodities, which is fine. That's something that does have to be done, whether something's socialist or capitalist. That it doesn't matter. You have to do that anyway, and that's what was done during the Soviet Union, during the NEP, was a focus on Department One commodities versus
Right.
Department Two, and this goes into the Feldman model, which is the economic model that the Soviet Union used to industrialize the country. But I would say, if we're not assuming that it's some kind of NEP, that it is a socialist country, because the person
Right. And if I
cannot
can touch on
cannot
commodity production, if I can touch on commodity production really quick, we know that commodity production leads to capitalism only if there is private ownership of means of production. If labor power appears in the market as a commodity, which can be bought by the capitalists and exploited in the process of production, and if consequently the system of exploitation and wage workers by capitalists exists in the country, like capitalist production begins when the means of production are concentrated into private hands. It's not when the worker it's and when the worker benefits the means of production are compelled to sell their labor power as a commodity. It's, these things we both agree on, right? I mean, that's not, without this there's no such thing as capitalist production. And you know if the conditions for the conversion of commodity production into capitalist production do not exist, if the means of production are no longer private but socialist property, and if the system of wage labor no longer exists and labor power is no longer a commodity, and if the system of exploitation has long been abolished, can it be considered that commodity production will lead to capitalism all the same? It can't. It can't.
The problem is that there are variation. For example, state capitalism. And state capitalism is a very real thing. I think it's important to understand them, because there were wages in the Soviet Union under socialism too. It was bought.
Well, yeah,
It
there
was
was.
bought. Yeah, but I'm not I'm not arguing that point. I'm just saying that it was there. I think the main idea is to understand: does the economy function by a plan that goes according to serving need, or does it
Well,
go by
yeah,
competition?
of course I would say yes to the first part. I mean,
Yeah, but does China do it?
of course I think they do.
I would say absolutely not.
I, I mean, if you, okay, so How
I
can you sit there and say that though? I mean, and this is a country. I mean, to call it a capitalist country, okay, let's call it a capitalist country. Okay, in the 5 years since Xi Jinping has been in power, over 88,000 uh, either elected officials or business owners themselves or business officials have been either executed and or disciplined. 88K in 5 years.
so
Okay, that's not something a capitalist country does, dude. You know what I mean? And that's
yeah,
for either
it's
environmental or political corruption.
that it, one doesn't have anything to do with the other.
Well, these are things. These are things that
These are not
communist
addressing
parties
these are not
do.
addressing the question.
What question?
It doesn't
I'm just
address the
pointing out
question as to
something
whether,
that that's.
if China's executing capitalists, why are there capitalists?
You mean why are what? I'm sorry. They actually
You're saying that they
corruption.
execute them for corruption. Okay,
Right.
that's fine. That wouldn't be something that would be unique to socialism. I think a better question is, why are there capitalists in a socialist country?
I mean, I. What do you mean? That doesn't really make any sense to me. I mean,
That
so you're saying the
why
Communist Party of China, they're capitalists because they're executing people for corruption? That makes no sense.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, why are there capitalists in a supposedly socialist country?
Why were there when Mao was there? That's a
Because
good
Mao.
question.
No, I can answer that.
Oh, well, tell me.
Because it was not necessarily socialism. It was New Democracy. New
Oh,
Democracy did not claim to be socialism. It claimed to be the bridge between semi-feudalism and socialism, a kind of way to deal with the period of capitalism that they would have to go through. And they did acknowledge that it was not socialism. That's why it was called New Democracy. And it didn't really work all that well. I'm not dissing Mao, I'm just stating the fact. There's a reason why development is happening now when it didn't happen then.
well, so then, well, it's happening now, and it wasn't happening then. And so, like a lot of people, I find a lot of people that don't like Deng, and a lot of Deng's reforms were actually started by Mao, Deng, and Zhu. Going back into the 70s and 60s, whether or not Mao held any animosity for the second generation of Chinese leadership is irrelevant. The rationale of socialism with Chinese characteristics is consistent with Marxism Leninism and is a pragmatic policy for the development of a material technical base.
I would
Capitalism,
I would say that, again, it's making certain assumptions. I wouldn't defend Mao's policies in the 1970s at all. They were horribly screwed up. But again, it's a case of where you're presupposing it to be socialist without dealing with the argument of whether or not it's socialist.
well,
Economic development happens under capitalism too. That's why we
well,
don't live in the same material conditions as the 1850s.
right. Well, the
What
building of
about this?
socialism is going to look different in China. Is it is going to look in Cuba, or is it going to look in the DPRK? You seem to have like this sort of
Okay,
perfect
I agree.
crystallized idea of
Again, it's
how
going to
a
look.
society should be built.
You're
You
saying
know
it's
what I
going to
mean?
look different, but we're
It
not
is.
arguing if it's going to look different. We're arguing whether or not it is. This idea of having, multi-billionaire capitalists in a socialist society, which didn't even happen under the NEP, and then having an economy that is based on competition, except for key sectors which are dictated by the government towards a path of economic development, not necessarily people's needs. Competition is the main mechanism by which make capitalism what it is. That's why China is a capitalist country. Just having economic development alone doesn't prove it to be socialist.
It's who controls. I mean, uh,
By
does
that,
China?
but no,
Okay,
but then
let's
you have
ask
state
ourselves a question.
capitalism. The
Give me a
state,
second.
the state owns the companies, but there's still competition. It still
Okay,
functions on a capitalist basis.
is China a worker state? Does it protect the interests of the working class? Well, and okay, if you consider in the last decade, the minimum wage in China has risen at a rate of 20% per year, even as inflation has averaged at 4% or less. Average wages also have risen at a double digit rate. Tell me, has that ever, that doesn't happen in a capitalist country. And
We
China
don't
is,
make anywhere near the same wages as we did in the 1850s.
dude, on average right now,
Just increasing wages doesn't
dude,
mean anything. You can
okay,
have
dude,
Western Europe
right,
do the
right,
same
right,
thing.
right. Okay, okay, and this is a fun fact that I always is about aside from the fact that they have the most people in the world, China, uh, they also have the most tourists. Well, how can this happen? I mean, for them just apparently just struggling on pennies
What
a day.
does
Well,
tourism
they're
have to
able
do
to
with it?
save 30% of their income as compared to a capitalist country like America, which on average, the average American worker can save around 4 to 6% of their income, as opposed to a country like
So
China.
that's what the definition of socialism is: the
That's
ability to
not.
say.
No, but that's something that only a socialist country can accomplish because that shit is nowhere else.
You can do
That
that to some extent in other countries as well. In fact, I would argue not only is this avoiding the issue of competition, the way the economy functions, I would say there has been an increase in inequality in China since these reforms took over. And that's
they're literally going to eliminate poverty in a year and a half.
okay.
Like, what are you
Okay,
talking about?
first, yeah, it's called the Gini Coefficient. It's a measurement. I
So
can
they're going to be
literally
the first
show,
country.
yes,
You're
it
going to come
is.
in a year and a half. You're going to come back and tell me, "Congrats, capitalists! You finally eliminated poverty for the first time in history." And capitalism's 250-year some odd history. You're going to come on here and tell me that they're the first country to eliminate
Well, first of
poverty.
all, I would really like to see what their definition of poverty is, because capitalists do that too. They say they eliminated poverty by simply moving the goalpost or
Well,
making certain
yeah.
things.
Well,
By
we know
by
that it's not
U.S.
possible.
logic, the Soviet Union was massively poor and everybody was dying all the time.
Well, then there's Marxists that have actual logic and and I read actual relevant shit and are able to explain how and why. And this is why I don't, if a capitalist country has, like I was saying a bit before, like if a capitalist country has one co-op, it doesn't immediately become socialist. So then why, if a country has all the big industry and land nationalized, practically all farming is collectivized, and the country has a system of planned economy, but they still have some small segment of private and small production left? How is it logical to call that capitalism?
It.
Socialism is a
Oh, I can answer that.
transition between capitalism and higher communism. Your notion that socialism is a total negation of capitalism is anti-Marxist and it's
No, I'm not.
undialectical.
I'm
That's a
not
quote
saying that.
from our friend the Finnish Bolshevik,
I'm
by the
not
way.
saying that. I'm not saying it's a total negation. For example, wage labor will continue to exist in socialism, and I agree that is a thing. My question is, how does the economy function? Again, you're saying that
And I was
just because
explaining
there's state
earlier,
ownership, that makes it socialism. No, it doesn't. Just because there was economic development doesn't mean that it was. You're presupposing all of these things to be socialism. You're taking accomplishments and attributing to them socialist without
are they
proving
just
them to
trying to
be
mimic?
socialist to begin with.
They're doing a great job of mimicking a socialist country then, because these are all things that are planned. These are all things that are planned ahead of time by the party,
To
monitored
which
by the party.
So,
These
again, you're presupposing the party to be socialist. We're trying to figure
they
out the
just do
basis
socialist
for
shit,
what.
I guess. I
No,
mean,
they're not. State owned. You're presupposing all these things to be that. You're just saying, well, the state does it. Well, it's planned. Well, economies are planned in the capitalist societies too. For example, coming out of World War II, and I guess post World War II, the United States was socialist. I
but see
guess so it was. So
that
it
was
was in
short-lived.
Britain as well.
That was short-lived, and this is another thing for a
So, what's the
capitalist economy.
threshold
The
for how
past
long it
30.
has to be?
Well, I mean, we're intelligent enough, Jason, to understand that a capitalist economy
What's the
is
threshold?
every 7 to 10 years you have bust, and then you have boom, and then every 7 to 10 years it's boom bust, boom bust. Every 7 to 10 years, you know what a graph of the past 30 years of China looks like, bro? Nothing but fucking boom, and it's not a fluke. It's not a fluke, man. It's because of planned economics. It's not.
You can do that in capitalism too. In fact, you can do that. You have to go back farther. I mean, the only reason it's increasing so much is because there's a room to increase. Like getting to the top and then going further for 30 years would be different than starting from very little and going up for 30 years. It's a process of economic development. I don't deny that happening. The problem is that you're presupposing it to be socialism while ignoring
Well,
that main primary question.
they had a people's revolution, and that revolution has never been overthrown, my friend.
I
So,
would say, yeah,
no, it
Mao
hasn't.
himself is primarily responsible for that happening.
No. There was a people's revolution. The Chinese people have never bowed to Western hegemony or
You don't
imperialism.
have to do that in order for
Yes,
a restoration of capitalism.
okay.
The
Then
Soviet Union went back to capitalism without ever capitulating to the United States.
they had a counter revolution. They had a
Yes.
counter
You
revolution.
think
Yeah.
that didn't happen in China?
Fuck no, it when? You
So,
can't tell me when it happened. I can tell you when it happened in the USSR. Shit, you can tell me when it happened in the USSR. Come on, dude.
so the advent of suddenly creating billionaires was not significant of anything.
There were millionaires in the USSR.
Yeah,
So
and that's wrong.
that's all part of class warfare that we both understand quite
And
well.
that's wrong.
What do you
Again,
mean?
if you want to bring it down to this, why
The
has
elimination of
inequality
classes is
increased
something
in
that we do
socialism?
in the building of socialism, Jason, and that means that
No, sorry,
not
that's
everybody.
wrong. No,
Okay, so
you're not going to create millionaires and billionaires and call it socialism. You're not. That increases a class divide. How can you claim to be fighting class
having
war by
millionaires, really?
increasing class distinctions? How do you justify that? Creating more classes, creating a greater divide between classes. The data is there to show that China has steadily increased inequality.
Well, they're essentially in their own NEP period right now. Of
Okay,
course, the
okay.
circumstances are very different.
I would
China
agree with
started
that.
from a much more underdeveloped position than the
Yes,
Soviet Union did. And it
I would
doesn't
agree.
and it
I would
doesn't
agree.
really have a socialist bloc to rely
If
on.
if we
Great.
say that it's an NEP, then you are admitting that it's not socialist.
No, that's not true either.
Yes,
Because
I
the
have Lenin
USSR
right
was
here.
still- was-
I have
was-
Lenin right here. The
dude,
new economic policy means substituting a tax for the requisiting vote. It remains reverting to capitalism to a considerable extent. To what
it has
extent, we do not know. Concession to foreign capitalists and leasing enterprises to private capitalists definitely means restoring capitalism. And this is part and parcel of the new economic policy. Lenin is outright saying the NEP is capitalism. And if you
under
say
Maoist thought, they would be considered patriotic capitalists, if you want to put it like that. China is
No.
undoubtedly still socialist by any material
Sorry.
analysis.
Yeah, the
Okay.
material analysis that Lenin already gave. It
Dude.
functions based on competition. You'd call it the NEP. The NEP
Dude.
is
They weren't
capitalist.
dude. They weren't Lenin and Stalin and the communists and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was not somehow a socialist body that didn't represent the people while the NEP was going on. Like, are you high? Like, and it's no
No,
different
but
in
they're
China.
saying it was not socialist.
I'm
They're saying specifically,
it's a socialist
explicitly
country that has
saying
a-
it is
has a-
capitalist.
Dude,
If
it
you
doesn't make
if
any
you
sense, dude.
so Lenin didn't make any sense.
No, I'm saying you're taking a quote from Lenin.
Oh
out of
no
context.
no! It's
No,
not.
I'm not,
No, it
dude.
is not out of context.
Yeah.
It is not out of context. He is outright saying the NEP is capitalist. They acknowledge that it had to be done. I don't oppose this happening as a necessary step of development. It does need to happen. But I'm not going to say that it's not. But it's socialism when it's not. There has
Right.
to be a period of capitalism. That's the evolutionary process, and that is
Even
proven
Engels
to be
said
right over and
all-
over again.
All private capitalism cannot be abolished all at once. Even Engels said that. I mean,
That's right, but that wouldn't necessarily make it socialist.
it wouldn't it totally wouldn't make any fucking difference because there's still a party in control of the country and it's still representing the people.
You
and
can
still
have
taking care of
any
the
party
people's
under
needs.
any name. You have to argue whether or not the country is socialist. So what? Albania? Not Albania. Tito Land. What was that?
Uh,
Oh, we're gonna take such a beating for not knowing.
Albania was Enver.
Yugoslavia.
Yugoslavia.
That kind of like supposedly market socialism was just capitalism with worker co-ops. Competition is the main mechanism, and Chinese companies compete with each other to accumulate capital privately using private property, even if it is owned by the government and leased it. Here it is. Lenin even said that this is what the NEP is. I'm sorry, but you're wrong.
Yeah.
I don't oppose China taking a capitalist road for a time to get to a certain level of development and then jump to
Yeah,
socialism.
there's
Totally, I
there's
understand
I mean,
that.
there's a little bit more to the definition of what is capitalism and what is socialism, than just that. I mean,
Yeah,
it also has to
I know.
do.
There is
There
more to
is
it than that.
there
But
is a
that
lot
is the
more to it.
main argument. That's the main crux of it. Without competition, you do not have capitalism, and you can have state capitalism on that basis.
Right, but we're getting away from, I think, at least in my opinion, who who's benefited in China? I mean,
No, that's not the question. But you're going to cite economic development. I
I'm
do
not
not.
citing economic development.
Okay,
I'm citing, okay, who controls China, right?
again, just because the party is in charge, that doesn't make it socialist.
Okay,
Like I
so,
said, that you're just attributing state control to being socialism.
well, I mean, it's controlled by a Marxist-Leninist
So they
and a
say.
pig farmer. I mean, so I mean,
So
so
they
he
so
says. I
so
mean,
what? We've had leaders come from humble beginnings. Jimmy Carter was a fucking pig farmer.
yeah, but he obviously was a class traitor.
Mm,
Or well,
okay,
maybe not. Maybe not.
in that case, yes. He to say
I mean, he
that he
wasn't
cared.
somebody who represented the working
No,
class
he wasn't.
proletariat.
He wasn't. But again, just saying the guy came from this plate doesn't matter.
Right.
the
Well,
the
I mean,
point is to understand how the economy functions, and
right,
that
sure.
would be the basis. Whether whether they called themselves Maoists or Marxist Leninists really wouldn't matter, because they could just say anything they want.
Right.
It's
Well, I mean,
how it
I've tried to
functions,
get into
what
a
it
little bit of
does.
how that functions and
I'll
how it
say,
works.
well, they got these benefits for workers. So what? The even better benefits exist for workers in Western Europe, with wages that are even higher. Even some of this is just purely anecdotal. It doesn't answer the final question as to whether or not it's socialist. Does the economy operate under a socialist mode or a capitalist mode?
It operates under a planned economic mode, and the planned economy isn't a characteristic of a capitalist country. That's
Yes, it is.
not a fundamental. It's
It
not.
can be done.
How can it
It
be?
has been done.
It's not done. It's not done.
Yes, actually, I can cite Nazi Germany for being a largely state-oriented, state-planned economy to a very large degree. But I
So
would say
Nazi
the
Germany and China are
difference.
the same thing
No,
because
no, I'm
Nazi
not saying
Germany
that.
relied
No,
heavily on foreign investment for their
no,
government to begin to
I'm not saying.
function.
You said state planning. In the issue of state planning, yes, they are the same in that manner. That doesn't make China Nazi. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that just having state control doesn't necessarily mean anything. South Korea had a tremendous amount of state planning in it. That didn't make it socialist. It made it a horrible fucking
It didn't make
dictatorship.
them successful, and it obviously hasn't done
It
anything for
yeah,
poverty in that country.
yes, it has.
Fuck no.
South Korea is a first world country, or damn near a
Which,
first world country.
which, okay, so that means they have fucking mass poverty, prostitution, all kinds of shit. I get that,
You
but
can
there's
have
there's none in the
mass.
DPR. There's no poverty in the DPRK.
Well, that's not true.
That's a separate
Yeah,
debate
that's a
altogether.
separate
But
debate altogether. But just having state, like, what does the economic plan go by? Fulfilling people's needs, or does it go towards uh, economic um, economic development? And
I
in the
think if we're on
NEP,
pace to eliminate poverty,
that
then I
was the
think
case.
that's a pretty easy answer, bro. I think that's a pretty easy answer. I
The
mean,
simply
there's
you
no
can't. The
in a
reduction of
capitalist
poverty is
system.
not in itself
There's
socialist.
no motivation to do that. There's no motivation in a capitalist system to eliminate poverty. Why would you want to eliminate poverty?
Poverty was
Why the
largely
fuck would you
eliminated in
care?
Nazi Germany as well. It happened under capitalism.
Why do you keep bringing up Nazi Germany, dude? Jesus Christ.
Because we're talking about state control over something. I don't know why you're harping on that. It's a legitimate argument about state control. They had a large amount of state control
You're talking
in
about
the
Nazi
economy.
Germany being humanitarian, eliminating
No,
poverty while
they
Jews were
did.
fucking being put into ovens, dude.
Okay,
That's not eliminating poverty.
no, that's
That's
not what I'm referring to. I'm not talking about ovens. I'm not talking about the Holocaust. I'm talking about
that's
going.
not being very
You just
humanitarian.
brought it up.
You're the one who
I am talking about